Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Sportscaster and Her Son, where sports bridges the gap between the generations. I'm your co-host, 12-time Emmy Award-winning sportscaster Peggy Kaczynski from ESPN Radio in Chicago. I'm the mom, I'm the sportscaster, and I'm the baby boomer.
And I'm the other co-host. My name is Jason Conander. I'm a junior here at the University of Texas at Austin. Here I'm super involved with Texas Student Television. Was out at the football game on Saturday against Iowa State. It was great to finally cover a Longhorns football win. So that was nice. And yeah, nice to be here.
Hey, thanks everyone who has followed us on YouTube, our website, thesportscasterandherson.com, and listening wherever you get your podcasts. Please continue to download and follow and tell a friend. Remember, we are on the ESPN Chicago app. That's our new home. And don't forget, you can also get some of our fan merch at our store on TeePublic. Check out the link on our website, thesportscasterandherson.com. Okay, in this episode, Jason, it's a pretty much a serious topic, something that's really hard for parents to talk to their kids about, but it's super important that they do. And that is child abuse in youth sports, whether it's Little League baseball, basketball, gymnastics, or other club sports. Your kid goes to summer camp or they take part in community rec programs. This is a problem that just doesn't seem to go away. We've heard about it from Olympic gymnasts, professional hockey players, like what happened here in Chicago with the Blackhawks and their video coach. And now, most recently, the NWSL professional women's soccer players report that came out to find out that they were groomed at a young age by a coach who went on to coach professionally. This is an issue, Jason, that is so hard to address, but it's so important that young people are aware of exactly what is going on.
Yeah, and this is a topic that is difficult for me to relate to because I did not have a very long history in youth sports, nor did I experience any of these hardships. And I'm also not a parent, so I can't relate to that fear of sending your child off to summer camp or putting your trust in the hands of a coach, which is very hard, especially with travel sports. And now you see in youth sports, it's a lot more hands-on. It's a lot of travel at a very young age. And as great as that exposure is for the young athletes, it also significantly ups the risk of things like this happening. And it's also very interesting to see how more this is in national news. Like you mentioned, the NWSL report of the grooming. There was an NHL player who was accused of grooming a couple weeks ago. Obviously, the Blackhawks investigation that went on over the past few years. So it's something that's very present in sports, and it's something that we don't like to discuss in sports because me, as well as just about every other sports fan, we like to view sports as something that's fun, something that brings us together, something that brings out that competitive spirit and can bring together whole communities. And it's very disheartening when things like this happen, but it's also important to discuss because they do happen and they need to be talked about to spread awareness in today's society.
So there's a groundbreaking new program taking on sexual abuse in sports, and it's called Spot a Spider. It's internationally renowned, teaches children and teens and young adults how to protect themselves from all types of abuse. So why don't we bring in our guests? Dr. Amy Saltzman is a physician, author, and former Stanford gymnast who was once a victim and as a survivor, or should we say a surthriver, of emotional abuse. One of the founders of Spot a Spider, along with advisory board member Judge Rosemarie Aquilina. You may recognize her as the judge in the trial of the U.S. Gymnastics team doctor, Larry Nassar. Welcome to both of you, and thank you so much for joining us, ladies.
Thank you. We're so happy to be here.
Dr. Saltzman, let me start with you. How did you decide to do something about an issue that enrages me as a reporter, because I have done story after story and it just seems like it's something that is not going away?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you as a reporter, because there are so many reporters that are doing stories on kind of the scandals and the salacious, upsetting news, and not so many that are doing stories on what can we do to change this or fix this. So thank you for this opportunity. And really, my experience is I was a gymnast. Fortunately, that experience was quite supportive and healthy. But when I was 25, I began a relationship with a life coach. And in August of 2020, a neuropsychologist determined that that relationship was a relationship of undue influence or covert emotional abuse or coercive control. And in the process of healing from that, I really started to look into what are these patterns of abuse. Most of us would call this abuse grooming. And the problem with calling it grooming is that we tend to think that grooming is something that leads to abuse. And we don't realize that actually the covert emotional abuse, the grooming, is as damaging or more damaging psychologically than the physical or the sexual abuse. So as I start to look at these patterns, I really start to think about this is what Nassar or other coaches are doing to their athletes. And the grooming is the hardest part to recognize. So I really wanted to be able to support parents and coaches in teaching kids to recognize these subtle patterns. And so I talk about patterns that a sneaky spider weaves to entrap someone in their web. And so that's really the origins of Spot a Spider.
And I want to get into the specifics of it in a moment here, but Judge Aquilina, we saw you get very emotional at the Larry Nassar trial. And in my introduction, I said, I get very emotional with this story. I was very emotional about when the Sally Yates report came out with NWSL a week ago, because things can be prevented. And not enough people are listening when someone does speak up. I just am curious to how you got involved and why you wanted to do something more than sit on the bench and sentence someone to 120 years in prison.
So I've never been a bench warmer. I've always taken the road, the new road. I've taken the cuts and bruises, and I would rather forge a new road than go on the well-worn path that leads to crime, injustice, and people using window dressing instead of actual solutions. And Spot a Spider is one of the solutions that I think is a tremendous asset to flipping the script, so that we're looking at the safety and protection and education and accountability of the abuse in sport and in every other form. And you can't avoid abuse if you don't know how to recognize it, how to speak up, what grooming, gaslighting, love bombing, and ghosting are. And that you as a parent have a right to go in anywhere the athlete is and ask the right questions.
So Dr. Saltzman already touched on this a little bit, but I think that it'd be good for all of our viewers and listeners. Both of you can explain to us a little bit of what Spot a Spider does, like more the hands-on, what mechanisms they teach, what like the direct impact that the program makes is.
Right. So I know that, Peggy, you had said that this is a hard topic to discuss. And so really the intention of Spot a Spider is to make a hard topic to discuss as easy, accessible, and straightforward as possible. So the cornerstone of Spot a Spider is 2 videos. One, how to spot a sneaky spider, which is all about the grooming and the covert emotional abuse. And then the second one is how to spot an obvious spider, which is how to spot and acknowledge and address obvious emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. So if a parent or a coach and a team have watched this, then they know what the abuse is. They can spot it. And if you spot it, you can stop it. The second piece of the program is really very detailed recommendations and suggestions for hiring, conduct agreements, codes of ethics written in both kids speak and adults speak, discussion questions for the videos, and very broad policy recommendations that really go everywhere from parents to a coach or a club or a team to the NWSL, to the United Soccer Federation, to the IOC. It's like, what do we need to be doing individually in our own homes to protect people, but what do we need to be doing also societally to create laws and structures that really do prevent this and hold perpetrators, bystanders, and conspirators accountable.
And the interesting thing about the videos and the information that Dr. Amy has put forward is that it really is user-friendly from any age to start the discussion. And if you think about the Olympians or anybody who's at the top of their sport, they all start with sports as very young children. So the information has to be understood from a very young age, the explanations, the conversation needs to keep going. And that's the beauty of Spot a Spider, is it really is user-friendly and very easy language for that discussion to continue from a very young age on into adulthood, on to parents, etc. And I think that will help to solve the problems.
One of the really interesting things in my preparation for this, and with both of you, is the perspectives that you both bring to the table with this. Dr. Saltzman is a survivor, and Judge Aquilina is someone who tried one of the most highly publicized cases of this. How do you take both of your unique perspectives, and how do you use that to really make an impact in Spot a Spider?
Well, I think for me, right, my story and my history was the motivation for creating it. And I think it gives me both a personal and a professional expertise. So I do understand it from the victim side. And then I understand it from what the psychological side, the psychology of the spider and the psychology of the victim.
And from my perspective, I have seen, you saw me in the Nassar case, but that's one of thousands of cases I have. I see all ages. I see men, women, boys, and girls, and giving voice and an understanding of the underlying issues and how this occurred, and making sure that the victims are not blamed or shamed, that they have a safe place to speak out, that they understand what's happening, and that defendant also understands what they did was wrong, and where everybody's coming from, to look at the errors in the thinking and how do we get to a place where we can eradicate this is just really, really important. And I think this program, Spot a Spider, looks at both sides and addresses the issues that I see every single day in front of me on the bench. And I've been a judge now for 18 years.
Well, Judge Aquilina, when you had the 150 gymnasts all allowed to use their voice before sentencing, it was so powerful. I think it struck people outside of the moment. Like, you knew that it wasn't going to stop there, and people would forget about sex abuse or child abuse in sports. You knew that this was going to go on. But something, Dr. Saltzman, that you mentioned, I wanted to touch on, and that was the languages used for definition of misconduct has allowed some of the abusers to get away with it and not lose their jobs, for instance. In Sally Yates' report on the NWSL here in Chicago, Rory Dames, the coach, did have an investigation 20 years ago at the high school level when he was coaching youth. And yet after 150 interviews that the police department did in Arlington Heights, they decided that it didn't fall under the definition of any kind of misconduct. And therefore, he was allowed to move on. And I think it's so important that how do we change the verbiage that is being used so that there aren't these loopholes to allow them to move on?
Right. I think that's a great question. And I think one of the issues is, right, again, this is why the videos are divided into sneaky spiders and obvious spiders, because obvious spiders we can point to. Honestly, as a society, we don't do a great job with that either. We should never allow a coach or a theater director or a boss to do anything that we wouldn't allow a school teacher to do in a classroom. So we wouldn't allow school teachers to yell at students or throw things or pull someone by their shirt. And all of those are obvious forms of abuse. The harder part is the subtle abuse of the sneaky spider, which is really demanding obedience and compliance and kind of eroding the person's sense of self, sense of value, sense of agency. And if that starts at a young age, then even when someone's an adult and a professional athlete, as in the NWSL, they've lost something along the way. And then it's harder for them to have their voice. So part of the sneaky spider is to help us understand what are those subtle behaviors, and to understand those subtle behaviors are actually abuse. They're covert emotional abuse, and we need to be calling them out as such. We need to have club policies and local laws and national databases that are recognizing covert emotional abuse in the same way that we're recognizing physical and sexual abuse. But one of the biggest loopholes is just not understanding covert emotional abuse. And that kind of sets the stage for every other type of abuse.
And I have to say, and I totally agree with that, but as we're getting into a voting cycle, people need to look at the legislators and who want their vote and ask them, do you know about the sneaky spider, the covert actions? Do you know what is missing in the definition, the legal definition in the law of consent? Because as I hear jurors and read juror questions and then go back and talk to every single jury I have, they are confused on the participation, the consent, the age difference, what actions a victim took or didn't take. And you can't consent in many situations, and yet they don't understand that if it's further defined in the law, we're going to see a lot less. Otherwise, we've got co-conspirators in legislators for their non-action. Remember, when you don't act, an inaction is an action. We need to hold them accountable for these definitions to eradicate this as well.
Right. And when you're in an imbalanced power dynamic, and especially if in that dynamic someone is being coercive and controlling, it's not possible to consent.
Right.
Some of the stories that I have done recently, there is a thread of commonality of it does start at a young age. The grooming. It is giving someone a ride home, inviting them over to their apartment to watch movies, buying the kid who can't afford to go to McDonald's, buying them McDonald's as a treat after a game, but being the only athlete. That was a baseball coach. Volleyball coaches, the same, traveling with the team without an adult supervisor. Trying to think, I mean, I have done so many stories that in the last few years, the one commonality I hear when I talk to the parents, and they will not talk about it, they will not come forward, they do not want to threaten their child's future in the sport. They don't want to risk their child not getting a scholarship because Coach AB has great contacts at the college level.
So there's two pieces to that.
What role should parents have?
Well, if your child gets the scholarship and they get it by being abused and they're psychologically damaged and they have anxiety, depressions, PTSD, suicidal thinking, that's not a good trade. And I'm sure you've seen and have covered, I mean, the number of deaths by suicide in the NC2A in the last year is astronomical.
With female athletes.
So you need to be thinking about like what's the cost, and it's your child's health, it's your child's well-being, it's your child's life that you're putting at stake for this scholarship. And then the other, I'll digress for just a moment, but the other argument is the percentage of kids who actually get D1 scholarships is infinitesimal. So to bet your child's well-being on that, that's a risky bet.
It always has to be safety over money and medals and scholarships. And parents need to be comfortable reporting something that they think is wrong and getting rid of that coach, because that coach is damaging their child. And when it's too late, it's too late. And I see a lot of parents who actually blame the child because they can't blame themselves. They can't stand that on their watch something happened. And they should be vigilant and report and not worry about the scholarship. A good coach will make sure that that team player is on the team and doing their best. They can't do their best if they're being physically and emotionally assaulted.
My mom just asked, what can parents do better? I want to ask for myself, from both of your perspectives, what can members of the media do better? Because before we brought both of you on, I told my mom this is something where, you know, we view sports as this great thing that's entertaining and competitive, and it brings us all together. And especially youth sports we view as something that's nice and teaches kids skills that they take with them for the rest of their lives. But how can members of the media and the general public do a better job of spreading awareness and talking about things that we just don't want to talk about like this?
Well, I think you are doing it. And I think the first thing is like believing the victims, or at least giving them a chance to tell their story, being rigorous investigative journalists, not letting the systems and the enablers and the conspirators shut you down, you know, insisting on answers to questions. If you look at the Yates report, the number of people who, first of all, tried not to participate in that report is shameful. And then the answers that were given, like, we need to be pushing for answers and not accept, oh, well, he stepped down for personal reasons, or we had a difference in coaching philosophies. Whether it's a club hiring a coach or a journalist investigating why a coach left, we need to be asking the hard questions and keep asking them until we get an answer.
And I like all of that, but I also think that why was Nassar important? For me, I thought it would go away after a couple of days, like every other case I had. What made it different was the media was there from all over the world because of the famous names. And they really carried the ball. There was very responsible journalism. But let me just tell you, with thousands of sexual assault cases from all ages and sports and walks of life, when is the media there? Rarely. In the legislature, the media is there every single time the legislature meets. The odds of someone talking to a legislator are very slim. The odds of you being in front of a judge and talking to a judge is very high. Judges and the courts touch your life in many, many ways. Why is the media not there? Why are you not reporting? Because people don't believe this happens, or that it could be happening to their family. And then every report that you do, talk about, well, here are the missteps. Here's how you report. Here's how you spot a spider. Here's some resources, and make sure that there's this reporting piece, but also an educational piece to keep the conversation going. Why did it take Nassar and reporters from all over the world? And the only way to keep it going, get in the courtrooms and report.
We're a few years removed from the Nassar trial specifically, and I think that we can all say that as a result largely of the trial, there is more widespread awareness for abuse and all this in youth sports. But when, you know, it still isn't enough. It'll never be enough. It isn't enough. There's still so much more to be done, so much more to be taught. What do both of you think is a good realistic goal for, like, where we are now to where we can be in 5 years in terms of spreading awareness and how this is taught to kids, and how a change can be made? Because it's something where, you know, there's no one league. It's not like something needs to be changed in one league. This is across the country in all different levels of youth sports.
Right. Well, I think where we are now, you know, parents can take action today by watching Spot a Spider with their kids. And that's easy and simple. And then in terms of the legislative process, I'm going to let Rosemarie speak to that. But we need to be changing our not only our laws, but our systems, the club system, the team system, the International Olympic Committee system. Those need to be reformed to address this issue.
Yeah, I think there has to be a conversation. Spot a Spider is just such an excellent resource to get the conversation going. And then parents need to practice vagina, penis. These are body parts, and they need to be used correctly. And it needs to be taught that every single time someone touches you wrong, that is a charge. That is, you tell someone, you talk until you're heard, you take action, and you demand change. And the legislature should write in there that prosecutors should, if the investigation shows that there's 10 viable counts, there should be 10 charges. If you look at the Nassar case, all right, Trinae Gonzer was assaulted about 849 times. How many charges were there? 1. We're sending the wrong message. So the legislature needs to put some more meat into the law, and parents need to watch Spot a Spider. They need to have conversations that are open and honest and get over the embarrassment. If you're embarrassed to say vagina and penis and breast, then say it in the mirror until you can say it with a straight face and teach it to your children.
Judge, well, the data actually shows that kids who are armed with proper language are much less likely to be abused. But we want to do it even before there's any touching. We want the kids to come home and just say, Mom, you know, coach is confusing me. She yells at me one day and then she loves me the next. Like that in and of itself, before any touching, is a red flag. Or Mom, Coach started texting me privately, or again, paid for my meal at McDonald's. Like, let it be a team fund or whatever. I'm happy to pay for the underserved kid to eat at McDonald's with the rest of the team. It just shouldn't be individualized from the coach to the player.
And start from the time the child starts to say yes and no. Learn informed consent, the body parts, have the discussion with Spot a Spider. It's really from the time they learn to talk. They need to learn good touches, bad touches, good gifts, bad gifts, boundaries.
Judge Aquilina, are you seeing pushback from the larger, the more powerful the organizations that might be behind the hiring of a coach accused of this? Are you still seeing pushback? I mean, we saw it with Michigan State. Recently, a football player from the University of Michigan came out. We saw it here in Chicago with the Chicago Blackhawks, who really covered it up for years before a player was strong enough and brave enough to put his name behind it and come forward. Is it a matter of the big organizations would rather it just go away and they just push back?
They don't just want it to go away. They want to window dress it and not talk about it appropriately and have no accountability. They want to act like they're, doing the right things. But if you lift the curtain, they're doing absolutely the wrong thing or nothing. For John Vaughn, you mentioned U of M. He was the football player turned to NFL who was assaulted 50 times by Anderson. He camped out over 100 days outside the president's door, and the president never walked down the sidewalk a few feet to shake his hand and say, what would you like me to know? How can I help? Instead, they preferred to hide under a rock and pay $480 million, which still has not and never will silence John Vaughn. And it's the same thing with the sister survivors at Michigan State, Ohio State, all of these universities, and the higher sports, the elite sports.
Well, and if an institution wanted to do the right thing, they would have put that money into Spot a Spider and other preventive programs. I am waiting for one institution to do the right thing and just say, yep, it happened on our watch. We messed up. We are so sorry. And here's what we're doing to take care of the victims. And here's what we're doing to ensure that this never, ever, ever happens again on our campus, at our club. It'd be so refreshing. $480 million. Do you know how much preventive education and change that could pay for?
And there's $500 million at Michigan State. There's $1 billion right there in education. And how many countless people could have had Spot a Spider open the discussion. And don't forget that these institutions at every level are not turning over the documentation so reporters like you can look at them and we all can learn and say this is an error and this is an error and use it as a teachable moment. Instead, they want to hide in the darkness with their private papers and not make any change.
Well, one of the policy recommendations for Spot a Spider is that there should be personal and professional consequences and legal consequences for any bystander, enabler, or co-conspirator, because that's the thing that's going to get institutions to correct is when people, because institutions aren't institutions, right? They're people. And any individual involved in a cover-up needs to be held accountable.
And let's not forget that we can't just point fingers. We can't say, well, you did it all wrong and we're all right, but rather partner together for meaningful change and not blame, but say, we're in this together for safety, for the future of sports, for the future of our children, for the future of our world. Why can't we partner together and work this out and stop pointing blame?
Dr. Amy, how can individuals, families, clubs, and other organizations find out more about Spot a Spider?
Super simple, www.spotaspider.com.
And it's available to everyone?
To everyone.
That's fantastic. We can't thank you enough for your time, Dr. Amy Saltzman and Judge Aquilina. Thank you so much for your important work on this topic. And hopefully we are not talking about this in such dire need in a year from now, but it's a start for sure. Thank you.
Thank you both.